Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our daily Moravian text reading Bible study for Friday the 27th. We are in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 26, verse 47 to 58. The passage is the story of Jesus' betrayal. They are in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's at night, and Judas approaches Jesus and identifies him with a kiss. The guards, the large crowd with clubs and swords and spears, then arrest Jesus. Jesus' disciples draw their swords. They think it's the start of a rebellion, a physical overthrowing of the Romans and the corrupt Jewish powers. But Jesus calls them to a different way. And indeed in Luke's Gospel, we read that Jesus healed the guy's ear miraculously. That's Luke 22:51. But Matthew is far more concerned through the whole of his Gospel about how Scripture is being fulfilled. That's why throughout Matthew you read time and time again, this happened so that the Scriptures could be fulfilled. And when we ask the question, what does it teach us about Jesus? I think a number of things stand out to me. I don't know about you. You can perhaps comment on this video and say the things that stood out to you. But for me, when we think about how Jesus is about to go through such a challenging time, how he's going to be whipped and beaten and humiliated and ultimately hung out on a cross to die and suffer, it shows me that Jesus clearly knew the Father's plan and purpose for his life. He knew that. He was able to say, this needs to happen so Scripture can be fulfilled. So Jesus knew God's plan for his life because he knew what the Scriptures said about him. For example, Isaiah 53. He knew that the Messiah would suffer. He knew that the Messiah would be beaten, that the Messiah would be whipped, and by his stripes we are healed, that the Messiah would be pounded for our sin and our iniquity. So in verse 54 it says, then how would the Scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? And so what we see in this passage is Jesus is walking obediently into that plan, into the purposes that God has for him. He's walking obediently into it even when it means he's going to suffer. He's walking obediently even when those around him desert him and choose a different path for their lives. That's why I think yesterday's reading, Gethsemane, was so essential for Jesus. Gethsemane was a place of surrender for Jesus, to surrender to God's plan, his wills, his way. We talked a little while ago in church about altar moments, and it feels very much that Gethsemane was an altar moment for Jesus, a counting the cost moment. When I read this passage, obviously we don't have Jesus's emotions put into the margin like a script of a drama or a production, but Jesus is clearly unfazed by what is going on. It reminds me of a phrase used by a rabbi called Friedman, who wrote a book, Failure of Nerve, one of my favourite books on leadership. And he talked about leadership as non-anxious presence. Leadership is non-anxious presence. And Jesus here seems to be displaying that kind of leadership. When you know that God is totally in control, then you can be a non-anxious presence at a time of conflict and crisis. And Jesus knew that God was totally in control. He knew that the Father could send 12 legions of angels, 6,000 in a legion, and God could do that. I mean, we know, if I was just reading earlier, 2 Kings 19:35, one angel moved through the Assyrian camp and killed 185,000 soldiers in one night. Imagine what 12 legions of angels could do. And so for us today, as we consider what it looks like to walk obediently in God's plan and purpose for our lives, I want to ask us, do we know what God's plan is? How he has called us to live at a time of uncertainty and crisis? What does it look like to walk obediently into that plan, even if others are deserting us and walking in the other direction? And what does it look like for us to be a non-anxious presence in the world around us? In other words, to be leaders in the world around us. Because each one of us can be that non-anxious presence when we know God's plan, when we know his purpose, and we know that he is totally in control. That's what it looks like to imitate Jesus. Tune in tonight at 7 p.m. for our collective time of prayer, where we're going to pray for God to move in this nation and across the globe and in our own lives once again.